Right, good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Project Review Advisory Committee. Welcome also to those accessing the meeting via the live stream on YouTube. During the live broadcast, members and officers are asked to please ensure that mobile phones are placed in the silent mode and only audio from the microphones will be captured on the live screen. Therefore, please ensure they are switched on when speaking and switched off when you have finished speaking. Minutes will be produced in the usual way and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on YouTube until such time as the minutes are produced. So the first item on today's agenda is the appointment of the chairman for the meeting. Do I have a proposer, please?
I'll propose Michael. Somebody's got to start.
Thank you, Donna. Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Harris, thank you. Are there any other nominations?
I would have thought Chris would have been better to
Chris is not a member of the committee.
All right.
No other nominations. So in the absence of any further nominations, Councillor Humphrey, you're chairman of the committee for the meeting. Would you like to take your seat?
Would you like to take your seat?
There's a surprise. Agenda item 2, call upon member services reporting apologies. I think you said there are none. Report.
Yeah, good morning. We do have a couple. We have Councillor Booth who sent his apologies, Councillor Carney and Councillor Sam Clark.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is to appoint a vice chairman for the meeting. Do we have any nominations for vice chairman? Do we need a vice chairman?
May I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that you nominate someone yourself? Otherwise we might be here a long time.
Andrew Wallace. Do you have a seconder for that? Part of the process, thank you very much. Everybody happy with that? Right. And therefore, Councillor, one of you are vice chairman for the meeting, duly appointed. Agenda item 4 is to report any items for consideration which the chairman deems urgent and there are none. Agenda item 6 is to receive any declarations of interest under the local code of conduct in respect to any items to be discussed. If you have anything to declare, please do so. No. Agenda item 6, I'll hand over to Councillor Bowden. There's a relief for you to provide an update and to where we are with this.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And I just wonder if it would be acceptable to you if I invite any members of the committee, including yourself, to interrupt me at any time for 2 reasons. The first is, if I'm saying something that needs to be explained more, then it gives the opportunity for me to do that. And secondly, it stops people having to listen to me just talking non-stop for 2.5 hours or however long it is will take for me to give my, well, however long it may be for me to give my talk. So, so if it's acceptable to you, Chairman, if anyone can ask questions and interrupt me, that may be a very good idea.
That sounds fine.
And Chairman, I'm very pleased to be present at your meeting of the Project Review Executive Advisory Committee. It's the first time this committee has met, and it was formed more than a year ago. And the reason that it was originally set up, I didn't know why. It was just, I thought there would be opportunities, there would be occasions when we'd be doing things in Fenland District Council, and it would be helpful to have some greater accountability to people other than the executive, the cabinet, and to give an opportunity for ideas to be bounced off members to help us in whatever project it is that was particularly problematic at the time. I didn't for 1 second consider that it was going to be to talk about the abolition of Fenland District Council and what was happening, but circumstances change, and this committee is a very good way to expand the conversation beyond just members of the Cabinet to other members of the Council, and to give you all the opportunity to ask questions, and for this to be publicly aired so that members of the public can also find out about what is going on. Because all of this came as a very big surprise to us all. At the general election, the Labour Party didn't have anything significant within its manifesto saying they were going to have a major shake-up of local government. So a couple of weeks before Christmas, it came as a big surprise to everyone that the Secretary of State, the Minister, Jim McMahon, announced that all shire counties and all shire districts were going to be abolished, together with a number of smaller unitary authorities nearby. The rationale behind that, we've talked about local government reform since the current system of local government was set up under the 1972 Local Government Act. And we've talked about reform ever since, and various items of reform had taken place in a piecemeal fashion in the last 53 years, or at least since 1974. So it's hardly a new subject, but it just suddenly, it was a great surprise that government just announced, this is what we will do. And the way in which they've done it has not been particularly helpful in the sense of keeping as many options open as possible. The 1972 Local Government Act didn't come out of the blue. There'd been discussions about it. London had been dealt with in 1963, but apart from London, within England, discussions had been going on. There'd been a paper produced. There'd been a lot of consultation which took place well before the 1972 Act came forward. Well, the 1972 bill came forward originally, and the new boundaries were set and all the new rules were set about how local government was going to operate. It hasn't happened like that this time. This time we are starting from the instruction which has been given by the Minister. And that instruction has been complicated by the fact that it's not a process which is covering the whole country, and those parts of the country that it does cover aren't all operating at the same speed of change. And pretty soon it was clear that there were two tranches of areas which were being dealt with by government on this, going at different speeds, and no one in, I'll call it tranche 1, was going to be influenced by anyone in tranche 2 or vice versa. And that wasn't a particularly good thing when you're looking at how local government should be reformed and what the boundaries should be of local government, because it meant that there were artificial boundaries put in place for consideration right from the beginning, which made it difficult to look at some common sense ideas. Because for us here in Fenland, we can see that we mostly lie within the Peterborough travel to work area, but you've got pieces of South Lincolnshire, for example, Market Deeping, areas such as that, which are really much more closely associated with our area and Peterborough area than they are with Lincoln, let alone northeast Lincolnshire or anywhere as far away as that. Similarly, if you look at the south of the county and you see Royston, and Royston has a lot more connection really to what goes on in Cambridge than it does to anything going further south. In our own area, we look at the boundaries we've got in Wisbech, between Wisbech and Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, or in fact between Cambridgeshire and Kings Lynn and West Norfolk. And those who are local to the area will know that some of those boundaries make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And this would have been an ideal opportunity to look at what real areas were of need for local government, particularly in terms of employment, so that we could have had a much more functional set of boundaries where you were centred around a work centre which was served by various towns and villages around that area. That wasn't possible because of these two tranches and tranche 1 not being able to interfere with tranche 2 or vice versa. We were set with very strict limits as to what we could even discuss about change. And as far as we're concerned, those limits which have been set meant that it really is only within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough that we have a dialogue to be had. That is the County of Cambridgeshire and the Unitary Authority of Peterborough. But within the County of Cambridgeshire, we've got the 5 district councils, Huntingdonshire, South Cambs, Cambridge City, East Cambs, and ourselves, Fenland District Council. So what government effectively did was say to us, yes, we want you to start from scratch and think from the beginning, but you must do it within these constraints. I have to admit, I tried to go outside those constraints in the days after the announcement took place, and there was some interest among local authority leaders in the southern part of Lincolnshire about the possibility of having something which was much more fens orientated and us looking towards the north rather than looking towards the south. But it became clear very quickly that government wasn't going to have any of it, so that unfortunately petered out. So we ended up with a position where the 7 authorities, that is Peterborough City, Cambridgeshire County, and the 5 districts within Cambridgeshire, we were told, you've got to act together, you've got to work in cooperation, and you've got to come up with some schemes of how a new system can be created, which will be solely based on unitary authorities. That is, it wouldn't be 2-tier, it would be that all local authority functions at principal council level would all be conducted by one council, just as it is in Peterborough at the moment. So abolition of the county, abolition of all the districts, and replacement by one or more unitary authorities. Discussions took place between the chief executives of those 7 authorities and the leaders of the 7 authorities. And I have to say, and I'll put it on record, that this wasn't done in a party political fashion at all. We all looked at it from the point of view of what was best for the area, what was best for the people within our area, and there weren't party political splits on this. I'm actually both surprised and grateful for that. But all 7 leaders were quite cooperative in the way in which they looked at it, and the 7 chief execs were all extremely helpful in supporting their leaders in doing that. It didn't take very long for us to decide that we didn't want a single authority for the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And if you think about it, there are some doubts about the legality of it anyway, because to have a mayoral authority of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough only having one council within it possibly wouldn't have been legal anyway. But we needed to look at this because of the criteria which government set at the very beginning. Government said, when you're creating your new unitary authorities, they need to have a population of between 500,000 and 1 million. Now, I have to say, even 500,000, our population here is 103,000. The idea that the lowest level of principal authority would have a population 5 times the size of what we are really removes the word local from local government almost. Absolutely. And let alone having 1 million people. And it would mean far more residents would have to be represented by each individual councillor, and obviously there'll be a lot fewer councillors in total than there are now. And that was a matter of serious concern, that you had this minimum of 500,000. The populations within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are quite interesting. If you take, it depends which year you take and whether you take the estimates from the Office of National Statistics or other estimates. Basically, approximately, you're talking about 904,000, 907,000 people living in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. That figure fell within the 500,000 to 1 million target that government initially set. And that's why initially we considered Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as a single unitary authority, and realised that if you've got an authority of that size, which is responsible for cleaning the streets, cutting the grass, electoral services, the idea of that would be it would be too remote from too many people really to be effective local government in the circumstances that we've got. It's possible that in an urban area it may be a more appropriate number to have, but the idea that we would have a unitary authority of the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough really was a non-starter from the very beginning, and we determined that. So we started looking at alternatives, but almost by definition, if you've only got 907,000 people, you're not going to find a way of falling within that 500,000 to 1 million target that government had set us. But within a month and a half, government let it be known, never officially of course, but let it be known that in exceptional circumstances, and I'm using their words carefully here, in exceptional circumstances, they'd be willing to consider unitary authorities with a population of as low as 300,000. Still very large, still 3 times our size, but they'd be willing to consider that in exceptional circumstances. within about 2 weeks, right across the country, that 300,000, the people forgot about the words in exceptional circumstances, and they assumed that pretty much every council would only be 300,000 or very little above. And we're yet to see how government will react to some of the ideas which are being put forward in different areas, with one exception, which I'll come to in a second. So we were tasked as leaders and chief execs with coming up with ideas about how we could manage to divide up Cambridgeshire and Peterborough into, we decided, 2 or more, in fact 2 or 3 unitary authority areas. Government also let us know that whilst it wasn't prohibited to split an existing council, an existing district council, it was highly undesirable and would have to be extremely strong reasons for doing so. And the reason for that is that when a council does get split, as must be the case for Cambridgeshire, of course, then you have a real difficulty in, and I'm sorry to use the word here, but it's the technical word, in working out how disaggregation will work. Because let's take Cambridgeshire as an example, and let's say there are 2 unitary authorities. How do you define which assets, which liabilities, which responsibilities of the existing Cambridgeshire Council go to Unitary Authority A and which go to Unitary Authority B? And you may think it's really easy. Just look at where the assets are, just look at, and it's very easy to see that. What happens to assets which are outside the county? What happens to assets which are split across the county, such as, for example, the ownership of shares in This Land Limited? What happens to the debts of the authority, many of which are not specific to a particular asset? And it becomes really complicated and really difficult, to the extent that you even have to start asking on individual cases. Is this person who receives adult social care, who came from place A and is receiving the adult social care, residential care in place B, is the responsibility for them place A or place B? And the reason we know how difficult this all is because it's happened almost on our doorstep only in the last few years, and that is with Northamptonshire. And when Northamptonshire County Council was abolished by government, and also the districts were all abolished and 2 new unitaries were created, they had exactly this and these problems. And we have the advantage that the person who was the chief executive of Northamptonshire at the time is now the chief executive of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, and in fact is an old friend of this council and has served us for quite a long time here. And that's Rob Bridge, by the way, who was our Section 151 officer for many years. So he was able to give us a good insight into many of the problems which happened when you do disaggregate a council, as Northamptonshire was disaggregated. And the fact is, even years later now, that process still hasn't been completely finalised in Northamptonshire. So we know that disaggregation of a council, as must happen with Cambridgeshire, disaggregation of a council is a really difficult and problematic thing. And government had said they basically don't want the districts to be disaggregated. That is, they didn't want Fenland to be split into 2 or Huntingdonshire or any other council. Various people have had various ideas about splitting councils. There are a couple of MPs who are quite keen to see little bits of Fenland and a tiny bit of Huntingdonshire split off from those districts and put in with Peterborough as a new Greater Peterborough. The problem of doing that, the practical problem of the disaggregation, would be enormous. So we as leaders and the chief executives all agreed that, with the exception of Cambridgeshire, where we've got no choice, we would not be seeking to disaggregate, to split any existing district council between new unitary authorities. And we looked at various options at the highest level. We looked at various options in terms of, should we have 2 unitary authorities or should we have 3? Now, when you've only got a population of 907,000, and if the building blocks are such large ones as we've got, such as Huntingdonshire and Fenland and so on, when you've got that sort of size, it becomes impossible to split 907,000 between 3 authorities and stay over 300,000 in all of them. And just for I see many of you got a pen and paper, so you might care just to take these numbers down as I give them to you, because they'll become more relevant later. Just to let you know about the populations we're talking about here, and as I say, these are ONS figures, which I took from most recent figures. Other people can have ones which are a few thousand out. Peterborough has 218,000 population. Huntingdonshire has 184,000. South Cambs has got 166,166. Cambridge City has 147,000. We in Finland have got 103,000. And East Cambs has got 89,000. So, with relatively few pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, there are only so many ways to split this up. And if you're not going to break any one of these councils up, which we're not going to do, or not planning to do. And we eventually came up with 3 options. We started off with 6 or 7 options. Some of those were ruled out because they just weren't practical when we looked at them in just cursory detail. So we ended up with just 3 options. The first is that Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire would join together in a single unitary authority. And then the rest of us, that is Peterborough, Huntingdonshire, Fenland and East Cambs, would be another unitary authority. That option puts us in the largest of the options that there is. We'd be in a unitary authority of over 600, maybe 604,000 approximately people. So it would mean the least local option to us. But it would mean for Cambridgeshire and South Cambs that the area which government has set as being the highest priority growth area in the country would be kept to itself, would be able to focus on that growth, and wouldn't, as is the case now, to be quite honest, in Cambridgeshire, it wouldn't be the case that other parts of the area would be part of the same authority, but not being part of that growth area would not be part of the focus of the work which was being done by that unitary authority. So there's some logic behind that. The 2 other options are that South Cambs and Cambridgeshire would be joined with East Cambs, and that would leave Fenland, Huntingdonshire and Peterborough as a unitary authority. And the third one is that it would be Huntingdonshire which would be joined with South Cambs and Cambridge City, leaving Peterborough, Fenland and East Cambs as a unitary authority. Now, none of this is really desirable and really helpful, especially from the point of view of Huntingdonshire and East Cambs. With East Cambs, the northernmost part is very firmly in the fens, and they firmly look towards Chatteris, March, even Peterborough, as being their hinterland. Whereas in the south, when you're talking about the areas around Newmarket being in Suffolk, unfortunately, or when you're talking about those areas, Bottisham and so on, down south, they very much look towards Cambridge as being their centre and where they look at. In Huntingdonshire, it's even worse, because you've got places in Huntingdonshire like Yaxley and some of the villages to the northwest of Yaxley, which very much are within the orbit of Peterborough. Yet you've also, in Huntingdonshire, got St Neots, which I don't think anyone would regard as being a northern part of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. In fact, in St Neots, I think they'd much rather they just had their own unitary authority all by themselves. I don't think they really want to join with anyone. But if they look in any direction, it's most definitely towards Cambridge, because they're really part of this growth. St Neots is the fastest growing town in the whole of Cambridgeshire, and it's really part of this growth agenda which Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire are part of. Diane.
Yes, so whichever option is finally chosen, we will have Peterborough with us, correct?
The way the rules have been set up, there's no doubt whatsoever about that.
Thank you.
Thank you wasn't very sincere. It sounded as though you didn't like my answer. Unfortunately, you've got your microphone still on. Unfortunately, that is a fact of mathematical life as a result of the constraints which have been put on us by government in the way they've set this whole thing up.
Thank you for your answer. I understand that. It's just that Peterborough is so vastly different to Fenton's needs.
Of course. We'll come to the detail of all of that later. But yes, you're absolutely correct. But it is a fact which we may as well just accept now. If we start trying to rail against it, we might just as well shout at a brick wall asking for it, so demanding that it fall down by itself. It's not going to happen. So that is a fact of life.
Thank you.
Right. So we have these three options which we came up with. We're in tranche 2. We decided quite early on we weren't going to try and get the county council elections abolished this year. We weren't going to seek to rush the process. We'd rather take our time and try and get it as right as possible rather than rush it, as some areas were keen to do. So our county council elections went ahead in May this year, unlike 5 of the county councils which didn't. One of the county councils which didn't go ahead, and which is Rushden, which is in this first tranche, was already starting the process of reorganisation anyway before this happened. So they are the first part of the first tranche, and that is Surrey County Council. And Surrey have had a lot of conversations between themselves. A couple of their district councils are in more than a little bit of financial difficulty, putting it mildly. And they eventually came up with various options, which they thought would be preferred from Surrey County Council, which at least initially wanted a single authority covering the whole of Surrey. What a big surprise. Whereas other districts wanted a series of 2 or even 3 unitaries to be created, or even they wanted to pinch part of Gatwick Airport and things like that. They all had various different ideas. And once they let government know what their various ideas were, what was a big surprise was that the Minister of State, Jim McMahon, came back and said publicly, "Oh, I'm minded towards this." Rather than letting all of these ideas play out, he gave an initial reaction which really was quite surprising. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 second, because I don't believe they're up to it in terms of organisation, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that government has already decided these are the boundaries we want all across the country. I don't believe that for a second. What I do believe is that they have decided pretty much what the criteria are that they're going to use to decide what the boundaries will be. And that came out in Surrey, where Jim McMahon basically said that I'm much more minded towards having a 2 unitary authority solution rather than 1 or 3. And if a government minister is minded towards it, given that the government minister will make the decision ultimately, it's an extremely strong hint. And that's the way that it will work here. We must, by the 28th of November, put in a submission from Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It will be one submission, but in parts, saying what options we believe are preferable. And different authorities within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough may support different options among those 3 that I mentioned in terms of how the unitary authorities will be configured. Government has said, only in the last few weeks, government has said that they will only consider options which are put forward by an existing council. So those MPs who want to see little bits of Fenland and little bits of Huntingdonshire carved off into Peterborough will unfortunately have no easy way of getting that onto the agenda. Having said that, government has said whilst they would only consider and accept those proposals put forward by councils, they did say they would keep in reserve the power to amend those changes, but for what they regard as relatively minor things, such as, for example, the number of councillors to be had. Now, some of us may not regard the number of councillors as being relatively unimportant, given that we've got to try to make sure that we continue to have the best possible representation for people in the new unitary authority. But anyway, they said they would follow what local council said, other than minor things such as the number of councillors, which they took the right to amend. So we have had, over the last 6 months, an enormous number of meetings, many of which have been in person, some of which have been virtual, between the chief executives and the leaders to get to the point we're at now. we have given our respective Section 151 officers tasks to try and put together numbers for these various options so that we can see just how viable they are in terms of the services they need to provide, how cohesive a community is, whether there's a sufficiently large tax base to be able to support a community, what the debt, well, no, they haven't really considered properly what the debts are to be like. I'll talk about that separately. What the likely service provision is in terms of big spend items such as adult social services, children's social services, SEND, and whether the option is a potentially resilient one. Diane.
Yeah, sorry, just for clarification, you've got three options at the moment. When you finally put those forward, you will be putting forward more than one option. Is that what you're saying?
The government has said, and they've already caught out a couple of councils in Surrey on this, they will only accept one option being put forward by any one council. However, they've also said that in a given area, in our case Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, they expect everything to be put together in one document. So that one document will need to contain all of the individual options proposed by each individual council within the area, all 7 councils. So assuming that at least one council out of our list of 7 supports each of the 3 options, then we will have 3 options put forward in the one document, but the document will say that Peterborough and Huntingdonshire support option 1, South Cambs and Cambridge City support option 2, and Fenland and East Cambs and Cambridgeshire support option 3, for example. So the document will contain all of the options, but within that document, each individual council will need to say which of the options it prefers.
Thank you, that's very clear.
Thank you very much. So we now know that we will have to say which option we prefer. We're not actually constrained only to consider the 3 options which are still on the table, but in practical terms, we've looked at the alternatives and the ones which are not totally out of the window, we have considered, and they got knocked out at a pretty early stage because it was decided either they weren't financially sustainable or they just didn't produce a council which looked sensible on a map. There was one which was called the butterfly option because it covered 2 councils which had a tiny boundary between the 2, which linked one big council with another council. So we called it a butterfly. Butterflies, we need something which is more sensible, which is more centred than a butterfly option. So the butterfly option was thrown out at quite an early stage. So we officers are continuing to put work in to look at the numbers involved in terms of what a council of these 2 unitaries would look like, whatever the boundaries are, if they were put together. Debt is a different matter. Much to my surprise, it turns out that government, at least in the past, and I've got no reason to suggest it's going to be different, have given no indication whatsoever as to how debt should be allocated when you have disaggregation of a council. And of course, the vast majority of debt, or largest debts that we've got, are the debts in Peterborough City Council and in Cambridge County Council because they are upper tier authorities. Interestingly, the next largest, and still very large, are Cambridge City and South Cambs, which have, by district council levels, very large amounts of debt, but that's because they continue to have a housing revenue account and they continue to own their own housing rather than having registered providers provide the housing as we've had for many years here in Fenland. So government doesn't say how the debt is to be divided up, and that's a really important part for any new authority because the level of debt influences how much interest and capital you've got to repay, what the minimum revenue provision is that you might have to allow for in your accounts. It's a massively important issue, and certainly as far as Northamptonshire was concerned, and there's no reason to believe it's going to be different. It was the same in Buckinghamshire when that was brought together a few years ago. We have the issue that the only advice given in the document which caused the unitaries to be created was, if there's any dispute, it has to go before the courts. And that was the advice that was given. Not helpful at all, and it's a major issue that we're going to have, regardless of what boundaries are chosen. It's a major issue that there's going to be a lot of disagreement about. But anyway, By November the 28th, we have to put in our submission together with 21 other areas around the country. And government has said that it will respond with its decision in the spring or summer, whatever that may mean, of 2026. And if you're being cynical, you could say, in astronomical terms, summer doesn't finish until September the 22nd, 2026. But sometime next year, they will come back and say what the boundaries are going to be. The timetable for us, as it currently stands, appears to be that in May 2027, we will have elections to a shadow authority. The two new unitaries will have shadow authorities. That is, elections will take place, and the people elected will form a shadow authority which hasn't got any responsibilities to deliver anything at that time, but will set things up for when they take over. And the takeover date, or as it's called, the vesting date, would be, and I didn't make this up, so don't blame me, and I don't need the jokes about how foolish this was. The vesting date would be April the 1st in 2028, because it's the start of the financial year for local authorities. So the unitary authority, shadow authority, would be there for some 10 months, and then on that date, on the 1st of April 2028, all of the assets and liabilities and debts would be transferred over from the old authorities into the new ones, and the new ones would start operating and start delivering services on that same day. Complicated process. Brenda, thank you.
So just to be clear, we don't know if we're going to share other councils' debts, but do we know if we're going to share other councils' profits, good things?
The first thing is the assets, yes. The first thing is we don't know which councils we will be joined with, other than the fact we're certain to be joined with Peterborough, but we may be joined also with East Cambs, or we may be joined also with Huntingdonshire, or we may be joined with East Cambs and Huntingdonshire. But for those councils, it's not as difficult. All of their assets, all of their liabilities, all of their debts, all of their responsibilities pass into the new unitary authority, as do ours. That's not problematic, not so problematic. The problematic part is that in all three examples I've just given, part of Cambridgeshire comes into one authority, R1, and part of it goes into the other unitary authority. And it's how those assets, debts, liabilities and responsibilities in Cambridgeshire County Council are split, which is going to be the problem for us. But as far as all the other councils are concerned, it's just that the whole council gets transferred over, so we don't need to worry about splitting anything. We get all the good and all the bad. Right, so we have 1st of April, we have the vesting date, and then the new authorities will operate as independent organisations. As far as the elections are concerned, government announced only in the last couple of weeks, in fact, even government didn't announce, it was the senior civil servants announced, that as far as we're concerned in Fenland, which is what we're primarily concerned about here, our scheduled elections, which were meant to take place in May 2027, will not take place. So the existing council will carry on until the vesting date of the following 31st of March, 1st of April in 2028. And so we'll have an extension to our terms of office of approximately 10 months. And it would have made no sense at all, to be quite honest, to have elections, as government said was going to happen, to have elections in May 2027 for an authority which was going to be abolished 10 months later. So the elections which take place in May 2027 will be for the new shadow unitary authority, together with the usual elections we would have expected for our town and parish councils. Now, you might want to know how many councillors will there be? How many councillors will there be in the new unitary authority? How many will Fenland have? What will the boundaries be? And I can't answer any of those questions. And in fact, well, as part of the submission that we'll make, we will make recommendations as to what we believe are the most sensible ways of moving forwards to determine the number of councillors in a new unitary, and also the boundaries to be set for the new for the elections to the shadow authority. Just taking a couple of examples which happened fairly recently, when when Durham County Council and its constituent authorities were abolished to be replaced by a new unitary authority, I say recently, 5 years ago, to be replaced by a new unitary authority for Durham. The size of the council they created for the new unitary authority was 126 councillors. And they always intended that that number would come down once you got over the very difficult transitional period. And indeed, when the next set of elections took place this May, that number had come down to 95 or 97. When Buckinghamshire, at about the same time, was created as a unitary authority and the existing county council and all the district councils were abolished, their new council had 147 members. And again, they had their second set of elections this May, and the numbers were brought down to, again, it was 95, 97, that sort of number. I was anticipating that we'd probably have, if not quite as high a number as that, a rather similar number, because you need to have some corporate memory from the old authorities to the new one. Because if you suddenly find yourself in an authority and people don't know what happened previously in their own areas, let alone in the other areas which they're now part of, it's going to be really difficult to have good representation and good decision making. However, government, in its wisdom, let it be known, again a couple of weeks ago, they're not expecting any of these new unitaries to have a council size, a number of councillors, over 100. So the likelihood is we'll be close to 100 for the new unitary, but again, it depends on the boundaries. Will we have Peterborough, Fenland, and East Cambs? Will we have Peterborough, Fenland, and Hunts, which, as you've seen for those numbers, is 95,000 more? Or will you have Peterborough, East Cambs, Fenland, and Hunts altogether, which is about 604,000 people? We in Fenland have the lowest ratio at district council level. We've got the lowest ratio in the area of councillors to members. We've got, councillors to population. We have only a little over 2,500 population per councillor, or about 2,000 electors per councillor. That figure is going to increase substantially, that ratio. What it increases to depends on just how big our new unitary authority is and what decisions are made by central government, because whatever recommendations we make on the 28th of November may be overturned by central government anyway in terms of the number of councillors. But I would reckon that we'd be looking at representation being much more like one to every 6,000, or maybe even one to every 7,000 population. And if you're talking about multi-member seats, it becomes even more problematic. But the numbers just don't allow for much else. If you've got a new unitary authority on the largest option we've got of the three, of 604,000 population, and you're not allowed to have more than 100 councillors, you can't have a situation. It's going to be at least 6,000 electors per councillor. And that's assuming you hit that limit of 100,000. So there's quite a lot of conversation to be had about that, and we will be putting a recommendation into government when we put this in on the 28th of November. But as government's already said, on minor matters such as the number of councillors in the council, they reserve the right to change whatever suggestions are made by the local authorities. What we will do here in Fenland is continue the negotiations which are taking place and the discussions with our neighbouring authorities, continuing to get the business cases created so that we can see the numbers which there will be and the financial viability there will be and financial challenges that there will be with the new unitary authorities. And then we'll bring this back ultimately to full council. It's actually a cabinet decision in terms of our constitution, but we'll have a full council meeting to discuss this, immediately followed by a cabinet meeting which will take into account what full council has said. And that will be the decision-making process as to which option we in Fenland District Council wish to recommend to central government and to get in before the 28th of November. Now, my voice is beginning to give way. I haven't been interrupted anywhere nearly as much as I was hoping by all of you here. But I think I've missed out too many things, I'm sure. But please feel free to ask me any questions. I'm sure there must be many. James.
Yes, I'll just crack on with the fact this is a new project review advisory committee. I'm just wondering the remit and the scope that we have. I mean, we've had a very good verbal update of where we are. You know, what is the remit of this committee in taking this forward? Because surely something like this would, the scrutiny part would go to ONS. You know, we have no sort of written reports, we have no recommendations. I just sit here wondering what this role of this committee is and what we want at the end of this meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Really good question as well. And I think that undoubtedly ONS will get their fingers into this and will have at least one session, if not more than one session, before the 28th of November about this. But this committee has more flexibility than ONS in many ways, and it gives the opportunity for more people, many of whom aren't involved in ONS, to be able to participate. It's an advisory committee, it's not a decision-making committee, but it gives you the opportunity, first of all, to hear what's going on, secondly, to ask questions about what's going on, and you're even able to have a recommendation, if you wish, depends entirely upon you, Chairman, and this committee, if you want, in relation to this, to make any comments, they can be fed back to Cabinet and will be considered by Cabinet, because this was meant to be an advisory committee for Cabinet. So that where decisions are Cabinet decisions, and this one will be eventually a Cabinet decision, then it gives the opportunity for people outside Cabinet to have some input in a much more formal way than just through group meetings or whatever.
And that makes sense, but I think at the stage we're at the minute, it would seem to me that some of the questions you can't answer need to be able to be answered before we could potentially do that anyway. So
You're entirely correct about that, but at the moment the question that we have to answer before the 28th of November is which of those three options, assuming we want to stick to those three options, which of those three options would we want Fenland District Council to put forward? And whilst I'm not suggesting that you should say it must be option one, not option two, or not option three, it may be that you as a committee or you as individuals have thoughts about whether it's good to be in the much larger option, which gives greater financial resilience, or the smaller one, which gives greater local representation. So there are some points of principle here to do with how we choose between the three options, which can be raised even now, even though we are still quite a few months away from the time when we have to make that decision about which option we go for. So it's as much as anything else, it's feelings which I'm interested in, rather than necessarily anything which is quite as firm as you mentioned.
Councillor Willen.
Thank you. One of your earlier comments was that the whole reorganisation process takes out the local out of local government, and there seems no doubt that that will be the case. The combination of our rural Fenland area with the urban sprawls of Huntingdon and Peterborough just seems to me that we will be just swallowed up and end up as second-class citizens, where our towns and villages get a second-rate treatment. On that basis, I personally would rather see option three as an option, as I feel we have much more to do with East Cambs than the urban sprawl of adding Huntingdon. We accept that Peterborough is inevitable, but certainly the urban sprawls will just soak us up.
And thank you very much. Is it okay, John?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. And yes, your analysis is entirely correct. There is going to be quite clearly an urban-rural split within the new unitary that we're part of. But don't forget that Peterborough City Council itself is an urban-rural split, and there are considerable areas on the outskirts or just outside the old traditional Peterborough City, which are part of Peterborough City Council, and they don't regard themselves as being part of the urban area at all. And in fact, they themselves feel that they're a disadvantaged part of the City Council because they're not part of the urban area. So it's not as though the whole of Peterborough should be thought of as being urban, because despite the best efforts of certain people, it isn't still fully urban. But I think that split is a really important one, but also in the example you've just been giving about Huntingdon, of course, you've got St Ives there as well, and very relevantly, St Neots also, and the size of that and how much it's still growing. The danger I see there, if it were just us, there's no good answer, by the way. I'm not trying to go say in favour of one against any other, but the danger we've got there, if it's just us, Huntingdonshire and Fenland, is not only would that be the greatest concentration of urban as opposed to rural, but there would be a natural economic corridor of interest going down the A1M from Peterborough down to St Neots, and that new unitary authority would have that as its focus, and we'd be off to one side. So that concerns me about that option. There are pluses and minuses on all three options, I have to say.
I 100% agree that urban sprawl would leave us, I believe, so isolated.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, obviously Peterborough is inevitable. I also agree with the comment that I think Fenland identifies more with East Cambs than the other areas. But which of, we know Peterborough's got debts, as has others, but which of the three options do you think will bring across the least debts for us as the new unitary council to have to cope with?
That I can easily answer, I'm pleased to say, but the answer isn't as good as you might imagine. The answer is easy to answer, and that is, the question is easy to answer, and that is, the lowest debt would be for a unitary authority consisting, for us, would be a unitary authority consisting of Peterborough, Fenland, and East Cambs. And the reason for that is twofold. The first is East Cambs debts are lower than Huntingdonshire's debts. But secondly, maybe much more important, the proportion of the liabilities and the debts of Cambridgeshire County Council will be lower coming across to that new unitary authority because it's a smaller proportion of Cambridgeshire County Council than in the other two options, since East Cambs has only got 89,000 population, whilst Huntingdonshire's virtually double that at 184,000. So a new unitary authority with Huntingdonshire instead of East Cambs would have a significantly greater proportion of Cambridgeshire County Council's debt, which is far greater than the debt the debt in Cambridgeshire County Council is far greater than the debt of the individual district councils that we're talking about. However, whilst the answer to your question is very clear, it would be just us, Peterborough and East Cambs, that would also have the lowest population, the least resilience, the least ability to pay debt, the lowest council tax base, because it's the smaller. So because we're smaller and therefore have a low amount of debt, we'll also be smaller and have a lower council tax base and be less resilient. So it's not a completely good answer to say, let's go for the lowest debt that we possibly can, because we also have to think about the ability to service that debt. So on all of these things, it's a two-headed answer. We ask about representation. Our best representation will be, from Fenland's point of view, if we're just joined with East Cambs and with Peterborough, because we would be a larger proportion of the new unitary authority than in either of the other two options. But again, you have the problem, we'd have a larger proportion, but of a unitary authority which itself is smaller and therefore is more susceptible to unexpected financial pressures. And let me just give you an example of unexpected financial pressures. A child with special needs may, for various legitimate reasons, come into a local authority area, having been in another local authority area, and that one child can cost that authority more than £1 million a year in terms of being looked after. Even with a unitary authority budget, you have 2 or 3 of those and you're already way off in terms of managing to stick to your budget for the year. So it can be really problematic to have, the smaller you are, the more local democracy you've got, but the greater your susceptibility to financial variance of one sort or another. So sorry not to, I've answered your question very clearly, that I've given you which option has the lowest debt, but that comes with its own problems.
Thank you. Yes, that's very clear. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Can I just establish we as Fenland District Council need to basically choose one of these options? Is that Correct. Okay. Because what I'm sitting here thinking really is the main decision is down to what Hunt and his CAMs want to do, isn't it?
No. What individual councils want merely determines which options are before government. Government will make this decision. And it doesn't matter who wants what, government will make its decision between the options which are placed before it.
Understood. Thank you.
Just on a slight tangent, throughout all of these proposals, has there been any indication of any change or whatever to our town and parish councils?
What a good question, and I wish I could give a sensible answer, but I'll give you the truthful answer. In the document which was produced a couple of weeks before Christmas, buried deep within it, we saw a statement saying that consideration will be given in this process to expanding powers given to town and parish councils. We've heard nothing since, and it doesn't surprise me because exactly what would we be devolving to town and parish councils? Electoral services? Don't think so. Looking after our leisure centres? Don't think so. It's difficult to see what. Adult social care going down to the parishes and towns? No. So I don't really see, other than some really minor things such as grass cutting, I can't actually see what significant powers could go to town and parish councils given what town and parish councils are like, because they're not set up to deliver the sorts of services that Fenland deliver, let alone the sort of services that are delivered by county council at the moment. So it was a throwaway remark which was in the paper which was produced 2 weeks before Christmas, and even at the time it seemed to make no sense, and government hasn't said a word about it since, and I'm not expecting any significant change to take place as a result.
No, and that's what I would have expected, but as you say, that one throwaway remark keeps everybody wondering, well, what are they thinking about? But as you say, in practical terms, I can see no major changes that are practical.
Whilst we're all focusing on what area we could or couldn't have, I think, you tell me if I'm wrong here, I think the biggest challenge is when your shadow authority is elected and your existing authority is still sitting there and you're going to merge the two in 12 months. Because I can see this being really problematic, because you're going to have a group of people that will be taking over. So they'll be, as the months tick by, inputting more and more and more. And you're going to have another group of people that probably haven't got a job, or if their councillors are standing down, that will rapidly lose interest in anything that's going on. So I'm assuming, Chris, there'll be a lot of planning and thought going into how these two will merge, because I buy businesses for a living, and merging a business into another one is an absolute nightmare, because people get disinterested and the other party, which will be the shadow authority, will interfere when they shouldn't be interfering. So is there a lot of thought and planning going into that?
Great question, and not only is it a nightmare when you're merging businesses, it's also a very costly affair. And given that government is doing this because they say it's going to save money, it does somewhat go counter to that. But yes, what in practice will happen is that once government, our various officers are talking to each other in different councils anyway. When government finally says this is the configuration that's going to be, then straight away officers will start creating their own shadow officer group to try and take things forward as best they can. They will act in preparation for the elections in May 2027 when the Shadow Authority is created. Don't forget that some members of the Shadow Authority may well be members, let's hope they are, otherwise we've got no continuity at all, may well be members of the existing authorities which are going to go out of existence 10 months later. That Shadow Authority starts off by having to get all sorts of really basic things sorted out about structure and principles and other things before they even start talking about practical matters about how the new unitary authority will work. But gradually, there will be more emphasis on what the new unitary authority is deciding, and the old authorities will be deciding less and less because they know they're going to go out of existence fairly soon. And this protocol will be set up in plenty of time. This has happened many times before in other parts of the country, so it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel. But just as an example, the new shadow unitary authority would be the one which would be setting the budget for 28-29, even though they won't be the authority until the 1st of March 2028, but they'll still set the budget whilst they're still a shadow authority. So gradually things which the old authorities would have done will now be done by the new. And there are things such as the coordination of contracts. It makes very little sense for one of the old authorities to enter into a 9-year new long-term contract for something when the new unitary authority needs really to be the one which starts bringing things together. But there will be cooperation, or at least on the basis of what we've seen elsewhere. There will be cooperation between the old authorities and the new, so that it will be made as seamless as it is possible to make it, but it won't be seamless. They'll do their very best to make it as seamless as possible. Don't forget, many of these officers who will be working to try and get the new unitary authority together will themselves either be looking to be employed by the new unitary authority, or may be losing their jobs entirely. So it's really important that we consider that from a staff point of view, we have issues. The lower down staff are in the hierarchy, the more likely they are to keep their jobs, because with all due respect, it doesn't matter what the boundaries are, you still need the same number of operatives on the bin lorries that you've got now. So, but the higher up you go, you won't need 7 chief executives, for example, in the new unitary authority. You won't need 7 Section 151 officers. You won't need 7 monitoring officers. And we've got to be aware of the difficulty that places on our individual officers and their families. And we can expect that at these highest levels, we will see some loss of officers, not necessarily in Finland, but overall, because people will need to look after themselves and their families and what their situation is going to be after the 31st of March 2028. So there will be disruption, and there will be a significant amount of cost in moving from the old system to the new one. I haven't even started talking about things such as where would a council of 100 members sit, and I'm not even talking about that because that's a relatively minor thing. But all these relatively minor things have to be thought about.
Any other questions? So, if I could ask you, Chris, what's the next step really? I don't know if members want to pass any advice as an advisory committee to Cabinet, or really wait until we get a further update. What is the next step really for this as a committee, and you in the process, please?
For me in the process, it's just attending more and more meetings with our chief executives and with the other leaders. And I can tell you it's actually been a draining and exhausting process, to the extent that the chief executive in Cambridgeshire County Council has actually appointed a deputy to take some of his work away, because so much of his time is taken up with the work for the new unitary authorities. And this isn't going to go down. This workload on officers about the change is going to go up. And it applies here in Finland as well as in other authorities. More and more senior officer time will be taken up dealing with the proposed change to new unitary authorities. So as far as this committee is concerned, you've already provided feedback, which I'm very grateful for. It may be that there are particular items you'd like to talk about, such as council size, or options which you feel are particularly unhelpful, or what we should be considering, such as urban-rural split, or whatever. There may be some feedback like that you'd like actually as a committee to vote on and agree. That's the sort of thing which should go back. But having said that, every comment which you've made has come back to me and will be shared with Cabinet.
Thank you. So, any other questions while we're... No? In that case, I'll thank Chris for that update. It's been very helpful, I'm sure, to all members. I know that it's not the first time it's been discussed, but it's certainly the first time at this committee. So, thank you for that, and thank you to the members and member services for the meeting. If there's nothing else, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.